Hello again guys, and welcome back to another Big Al Devlin video here at the House of Devlin, and this video is a continuation of our paganism discussion that we have here on the channel. Feel free to put into the comment section whatever you want. All contributions are welcome, especially those which are constructive, whether they are criticism or whether they are, just simply giving a thumbs up. Doesn't matter. We're all here to discuss paganism and discuss the aspects of it. It doesn't really matter whether we have different opinions, as long as both of our opinions have value. That's all that matters. We are further progressing our faith, if you wish. Now, enough of that. Let's talk about what we're going to talk about today on today's video, and that is talking an expansive talk on the topic that I talked about last time, which was about living as the Asgardians or the Aesir would, and living as the Vanirheim or the Vanirian. Which lifestyle is correct for a pagan to live? Well, the answer is both of them. Both of them have merit and both of them have value. And typically most pagans will live of the Aesir. They will live of the Asgard. But myself and a few of us would live as the Vanirian, which officially would be of the Asgard, but is in very much takes into consideration the long scope, the long game of it all. It takes in the end game. Okay, and it takes in the perspective of the end game, and acknowledges it more so than perhaps the Aesir way. The Aesir way is also a very methodical, very ordered, very logical way, very disciplined way to live your life also. Now, obviously, I'm going to be focusing on why I personally believe, and I'm going to go into much more detail to clarify things about the Vanirian way of life. I'm going to go into detail of the runes as a guidance, for example, and describe why I believe it's a very valid form of lifestyle. But before we go into that, I just want to clarify also what essentially the majority of pagans, the lifestyle that they would live, and that would be, as I say, the one of the Aesir essentially, or of the Asgard. It's using the Aesir as an example because the Aesir tribe of gods, which is Odin, Thor, Tyr, the Aesir tribe of gods are a very disciplined, lawful, ordered, tame, and I don't mean tame as in timid. I mean tamed as in like they control variations to essentially an ordered lifestyle essentially, and this is really what the Asgard represents. It's being as disciplined as possible. It's about living a balanced lifestyle, and a balanced lifestyle in direct reference to the life cycle that exists within paganism. That is the balance between creation and destruction. You must have, or strive to have within your life, by the time that you enter this world and by the time you leave it, by the time you leave the world, you must have had equal amount of creation and destruction in your life, or at least have tried to have a balance between the two, so that a balance and a harmony is maintained between the two separate forces ultimately that exist within life. And by maintaining that balance, you maintain the flow of the cycle, and don't get too much of a good thing or too much of a bad thing. You just simply maintain the cycle and let it progress slowly ever forwards. Now, to do so, to live such a way of life, it requires a heck of a lot of discipline, as well as sort of honesty to yourself. It's an admirable way of life. I am not discounting it in any way. In fact, I'm encouraging it. I believe that the mass majority of pagans should live this lifestyle because it is in theory the correct way to live. It is the way that pagans would believe, the majority of pagans would believe is the way of life, and if in doubt, go down this path, because it is essentially the correct path. That living this disciplined life where you acknowledge when you have brought destruction to something, that you also bring in an equal amount of creation also, and vice versa. And that's sometimes the harder point, that you must accept that things must come to an end, and sometimes by your hand. And this is acknowledging not just the physical things or life as we would mass majority of people would see it, that there's not people, it's not animals, it's not plants, it's everything around us, even physical inanimate objects like buildings and stuff. Things must come to an end at one point. Everything must turn to dust, essentially, which is, you know, ultimately what pagans believe, you know, that the destiny of the universe is that even the gods themselves will die before the next cycle can begin anew. And by living a disciplined life where there is a balance between creation and destruction, there's an equal amount, is the best way to almost strive off the end point of the universe. It slows down the progression ultimately towards that. If you have too much creation or destruction, ultimately essentially what you're doing is creating an imbalance, or at least this is the thought pathways behind such a lifestyle, and it creates an imbalance that will obviously fuel the progression towards Ragnarok, which is essentially the apocalypse for pagans. Okay, the end of all things, as I've just described. But the one issue that I have with living as such is that it most typically only involves sort of acknowledgement and fulfillment of really the first ayat of runes, if we were to discuss the runes, for example, as a sort of guidance on how to live one's life. And it also deals with, the second ayat as well. So it's the first and the second ayat really sort of combined in many respects, but it really doesn't deal with all of the second ayat. It really only goes up to Yara, doesn't even really go up to Yara, but yeah, it does. So it takes into consideration all the runes up to the rune of Yara in its lifestyle. But predominantly focuses on the creative and destructive sides that the runes represent. So it considers Fehu, Aruz, Voizas, Ansuz, Rezu, Kenaz, and Gabo. Okay, and then culminating in Wunyo, which is the creative side of life. Okay, those runes represent the creative aspects of a life. Okay, whereas then it then progresses into, and this is something obviously the Aesir way of life, or the Inengard way of life, very much considers as well, because there's an equal balance between creation, I've just mentioned in the runes, and destruction. And the destructive aspects of the ayat, which is within the second ayat, is Haralaz, Laufis, Isa, and finally really a sort of culmination into Yara. Now the second ayat also, does have additional aspects to it, which I would call the bridge to higher consciousness, or the transitional ayat. Really, it's a sort of mini ayat within the second ayat, and it includes Iwaz, Piefro, Alraz, and Sorelu. Which is essentially the Sorelu being the end of the second ayat, and then we progress into the third ayat, which is not really considered at all within, as I say, the sort of Inengard way of life, but as I say, this transitional ayat as well, which really is where we start to progress into the more higher divinities, essentially the higher learning planes. Aren't really taken fully into consideration by this type of lifestyle. They sort of are naturally allowed to sort of progress, obviously, by completing, up to Yara. You also then will now naturally progress into ultimately Sorelu, but there is no active sort of trying to progress into these runes by living this sort of very disciplined lifestyle. As I say, the main focus is on creation and destruction, and not truly sort of understanding then where it's going to go from there on in. But obviously amongst sort of senior pagans, of course, they would understand where it's going. But as I say, the focus of such a lifestyle is really on the runes that I just described, the creation and destruction runes, sort of ultimately sort of culminating in Yara. Okay. Now this is as I say, a good way of living, because by culminating as much yada as possible, you do expand the higher consciousness. You do then progress into that transitional sort of bridge of higher consciousness that I described, those extra runes within the second ayat, that then allow you to progress into the third ayat, which is all to do with the spiritual aspects of gaining oneness and development towards oneness, and ultimately the end stage of a Fjorda. And of course Dagas, but Dagas is only really achieved once Ragnarok has occurred. It's nothing you can really do about that. It just happens if you've got a Fjorda at the point of Ragnarok. Okay, and so yes, this way of lifestyle will fulfill the path of runes, absolutely, but I believe that most pagans are not conscious on how it is doing so. They are simply acting because this is the kind of way that they've been told, and it's the way that they understand at a more basic level, but they don't really consider the higher levels of which it's having an impact on. Whereas living like the Vanirian lifestyle, that is the life of Vanirheim, how the gods of Vanirheim would live. Vanirheim is officially classed as a planet, a realm even of the Uttengard, okay, which would make it really essentially like an outlaw realm to both Midgard and Asgard. Anywhere considered of the Uttengard is really kind of considered not a good place, you know. It's not contributing correctly to the balance and the cycle of life. It is seen as being essentially a force of the contribution factor to the forces of destruction. But really, with Vanirheim, it's unlike Jotunheim, for example, where there are destructive individuals. Unlike, for example, Helheim, the realm of the dead. Well, of course, it's going to be of the Uttengard. There is destructive aspects down there also. Vanirheim is actually the opposite. Vanirheim is seen as the Uttengard because there is so much life, so much creation. And there's too much creation in the eyes of an Aesir, or a member of the Innengard. It's seen as being overbalanced towards creation, and as a result, too much of a good thing, having too much creation, simply leads to more destruction. Because of course everything that's created must come to an end, and so the more things that are created, the more entropy you have, and so thus the more destruction you have. And so it's seen as a way of ultimately accelerating that wheel of, or cycle of life, essentially, of life and destruction. It accelerates it and puts a lot more balance into the destruction aspect. Even though you're creating, you're actually adding to the destructive aspect also, and so speeding up the wheel and bringing Ragnarok on sooner perhaps than it should otherwise be. In many ways that is correct. By having too much creation, unteamed creation is absolutely a way of, you know, potentially adding extra destruction to the world, at least when you have it of that perspective. But if you look at it in a different way, okay, the way that a member of the Vanir or the Vanirians would see it, like Vanirian, like myself, for example. I'm not a Vanir, but you know, I follow the Vanir, so I'm a Vanirian. I believe in the Vanirheim way of life. As I say, the planet of Vanirheim is seen of the Uttengard because it is wild, untamed. Essentially, it's not destructive, it's very creative, but it's ultimately, as I say, wild and untamed, and as a result, in the eyes of a member of the Innengard, is seen as being potentially a destructive realm. But ultimately, the way that a Vanirian would see it is, for everything that is created, every passing moment that we fulfill, everything that is brought into the world that can be considered essentially as living, but everything that is created by something that is living, so, you know, inanimate objects, when the world shapes itself with its own weather systems and so on and so forth, there is creation, but there is essentially destruction in that sense also. But all this creation, okay, is bringing and fulfilling moments. It's fulfilling possibilities. Anytime anything is created, you are fulfilling a probability. every time you fulfill a probability, you are achieving fate, the fate of that particular thing that is brought into the world, or that moment that is fulfilled. It could be a simple thing, just something in your life that you're doing and you complete, and something like when I completed this video, I will have achieved the creation of this video, for example. That's not necessarily creating something, but it's the process of creating. Just like when I've considered what I'm going to talk about in this video, that again is the fulfillment of the thinking processes behind the video. So there's a lot of creation into before actually creating something. Sometimes it's simple moments in life are still potentialities being fulfilled. Okay, so by going out and living life, fulfilling possibilities, going out there and doing things, bringing life into the world, but not preserving at all costs, as many would misunderstand this way of life. The way of the Vanirians is not about preserving life. They do not preserve life in any way more than an Aisha or a member of the Asgard would. They do not believe, or we do not believe, in preserving life beyond its natural life cycle. Maintaining or holding on to something beyond, when it should be just sort of let go and sort of forgotten about. That is not what we're about preserving. No, we're about creating, and that's a difference. Okay, it's about creating and fulfilling, more to the point, fulfilling more possibilities, more probabilities. And by doing so, every time a possibility or probability is fulfilled, you are giving a little bit more oneness to the universe. You are fulfilling ultimately the universe's sort of grand plan, that is to fulfill oneness, to fulfill as many fates as possible, and to learn from those fates. It's an organic process for the universe. As the universe progresses, as time progresses, as realities expand, and so on and so forth, it's all about the reason all this exists is because the universe, or what the origin of the universe, whatever that may be, when it begins to expand, it expands so that it can fulfill fate and probabilities. And I've done videos on that before about giving relativity to individual sort of fulfillments and stuff. Please check them out if you're not quite getting what I'm talking about at the moment. But ultimately, the expansion and the existence of the reality that we exist in purely exists for one reason only, and that is for the universe to fulfill as many fates, or as many probabilities, or fate paths, or life paths, whatever you want to call them, as many moments, as many possibilities, probabilities as possible. Because each time it does it, it learns, it gains knowledge and understanding of that knowledge, and when you do that, you create wisdom, essentially. And wisdom is the glue, essentially, that holds oneness together. It holds the fusion of self and other together, and that creates oneness. I don't want to get too much into that discussion of what oneness is and how it's created, because I've done it in, as I say, in other videos that have lasted an hour, 2 hours long. So it's, if I was to do that now, we'd have a 3-4 hour long video. Okay, so I'm only just touching upon the subject. It goes a lot deeper than that. But ultimately, what you can understand is, if the universe exists, or all the realities exist, that's the physical realm that we exist in, Midgard, and also all of the spirit realms, the 8 spirit realms, if these all exist simply so that fate can be fulfilled, and fate can flow through the universe and fulfill probability and fulfill possibilities and moments and stuff like this, then surely that's the way that you must live your life also. You must go out there and live your life, fulfill as many possibilities and probabilities as possible, because that's what the universe is trying. And all you're doing, all you are, is simply a part of reality. You're a part of the universe. You're a child of the universe, just as much as the gods are, and everything within all the realms. You are simply a child or product of this entire universe. Forget Ymir, forget Odin. We are the children of what it comes before all that, the beginning of reality. We come from the same origins. And so all of us, God, mortal, whatever, must really are essentially extensions of the universe, And so it's really our responsibility to continue the universe's will, because we are the universe and the universe is us, so to speak. I hope this is sort of getting in, because it's quite hard to word. Sometimes language is limiting, because when you're talking of the divine or the spirit realms, these are things that words have not been invented for yet. And so trying to translate knowledge that you've gleaned essentially from the spiritual realms or of faith and things like this, it's sometimes almost impossible to put into sort of words that we have at this point in time. Perhaps we will evolve to include them in our language, but our language at the moment is rather limiting, and so I hope that it's coming across correctly. I'm trying my best to explain the process. And so essentially what I'm saying is, because we are of the universe, we must essentially live as the universe is. We must progress forwards in time and fulfill probabilities. Now, the issue that most pagans have with this is by fulfilling and concentrating on fulfilling, and it's not just fulfilling possibilities, but fulfilling probabilities and possibilities to the max. That is, acting almost like Canas. We are all essentially an aspect of Canas. Canas swells, okay? Canas swells essentially the transformation of intention into action. That is the process of Arezu. It swells that transformation process to the point where we get Gabo, okay, the merger of between all the forces. And by achieving Gabo, we achieve the maximum potential of any possibility. And from this, we get direct result of this is that we experience Wunyo, essentially a joy of achievement. Okay, now this is something obviously that the Aesir way of life also achieves. It does achieve Wunyo because they are creating as well as destroying, but by maximizing the essentially your role within Canas, you are fulfilling as much as possible the possibility, the potential of any possibility. And so in your life, it's not like you don't live a disciplined life. For example, whenever you do something, you must do it to the max. For example, I have studied martial arts since I was 5. And unlike most people, I didn't do it for a few years or until I was sort of a teenager and then got bored, because then when I became an adult, I had other responsibilities and things to do. I've continued my study of martial arts to present day and will continue to do so until the day I die. And so I've actually been doing it for 26 years now, basically my entire life, from as early on as I possibly could have done it. I've done other things as well. All my hobbies, for example, one of my hobbies that I do, I've been doing since I was 9. So again, 21 years is it that I've been doing that, and so, or 22 years, whatever. I've been doing that. So and there are other things in my life. Everything that I do, I keep doing until it reaches its maximum potential. It comes to an end point where there is no more progression to be achieved, or I just keep doing it if there is no end point to achieve. And so, this is essentially a direct representation, a direct metaphor or representation within my life of how a Vanirian should live. They should do everything they should to its maximum potential. Now, if that maximum potential is very minimal, it's a few minutes worth of time, for example, or like, for example, making this video, there's a preparation for it that's been taken a couple of weeks, for example, the filming of it, however long this video ends up being, maybe an hour, maybe half an hour, whatever, and then there's the uploading time. But once it's done, there's nothing I can really do for it. Then there's a little bit of comments here and there, but then essentially that process of creating this video is over. Okay, and instead of then focusing on that video and constantly looking, or how's it doing, or let's try and keep it alive, whatever, I forget about it. I don't limit myself essentially to Isa. Essentially, Isa is a standstill, where which is brought on by Alaufes. This being the destructive ayat now, because the destructive aspect of creating a video like this is to then move on, do another video, take on new concepts, to not linger over something that you've created and it's reached its potential, it's reached its max, which is putting it up there. What happens with it then is down to you guys, whether you watch it, whether you like it, share it, comment on it, things like this. And obviously I'll respond to a point, you know, I will comment back with people, but it's not the video that I'm expanding, it's the comment section which is then growing, okay? But the video itself, as far as I am concerned, has achieved its maximum potential, and I will let it naturally decay, if you wish. I will walk away from it, and its memory to me will go. One of the advantages of amnesia is that I've learnt, because I suffer from amnesia, one of the things that I've learnt from having that experience is that you must live day by day. You must live process by process, achievement by achievement, and move on, because I can't, you know, necessarily remember what I've done anyway in the past. And so, you know, it's very easy for me to let go. And when I first started suffering from amnesia 3 years ago, at first it was scary, but it then, once my mind settled and, you know, all I was doing was forgetting the present as such, you know, and I'd recovered a lot more the memories that were important, essentially, from the past. But going day by day, forgetting what I'd done the day before, or even sometimes moments before or hours before, whatever, it was a liberating process. Believe it or not, it felt so much relief. So many of us, we worry, and the root of our anxiety and our worries is built upon the fact that we suffer from Laufis, which is representing essentially need or hardship. We want to hold on to something that is going away. You know, we hold on to our memories of something that has been good during the week, and we despair over the fact it's no longer with us, and that, oh fucking hell, Thursdays are shit, aren't they? Monday was so much, well, the weekend was so good even. I had such a good weekend. Why do I have to be here? You know, Wednesdays, Thursdays, whatever. There are a horrible day, middle of the week. Can't wait till Friday. But you essentially, there's that despair. It's a bit of a strong word to use in this case, but there is essentially that despair that is described in the runes, that comes from essentially Laufis, and ultimately you can stick yourself within a temporary Isa on that point. But essentially, you know, this is on a micro scale obviously, but you know, by having amnesia, I learnt, and this is what I'm passing on to you, my knowledge I gained from having suffered from suffering from amnesia, is that by letting go day by day of everything that's happened, even moments before, is that you get relief. You pass through the Haralas, the destructive aspect, the Laufis, that is the thing going and becoming a memory. The Laufis would be holding on to the memory of something, and the Isa is a sort of standstill in your sort of lack of fulfillment for the rest of the week until again you sort of get to, you know, the next thing that you're looking forward to. But once you let go and you progress, you experience Yada, which is essentially another form of joy, just like Wunyo, but it's the sort of, it's a next level of joy. It's not only physical joy essentially, or the physical experience of joy, it's a spiritual experience of joy. In essence, we're starting to get into the higher sort of consciousness, and so we progress onto Yada directly after Isa, or passing through an Isa, and we just get that joy of something coming to an end, but something beginning. And so, as I say, by suffering from amnesia, I've learned that by progressing and not holding on to something that was good in the past or whatever, and just simply, or bad, you know, sometimes we hold on to the bad things and we can't let go. We're like a pit bull biting on something. We can't start chewing on it. It winds us up. You let go of all that anxiety, let go of it, and you'll progress onto Yada. Okay, and it's ultimately the same. It's that sort of aspect of moving on, creating something to its maximum potential, but then moving on, no matter how good it felt or bad, no matter how good or bad it felt, you let it degrade, you let it go, and essentially you let it come to destruction. Okay, and by allowing it to pass through the destructive cycle with ease, you'll progress into Yada, but then progress very quickly. Once you've attained Yada multiple times, your consciousness will expand to a point where it reaches a critical expansion point called let's get me the pronunciation correct, EWAS. Okay, and EWAS is when your mind has essentially expanded so much through the process of yada that it then leads to an expansive training process, essentially, expansive learning process. Essentially, your connection to the other realms becomes so strong that your mind begins to expand itself. Ultimately, it expands itself, and your understanding of everything around you self-proliferates. Okay, it's like a critical mass in a nuclear reactor. It reaches that point where it just doesn't stop, it continues on. And that's where you're trying to get to, because once you crack into AWAS, you then get into the other runes. And this is why living as a Vanirian, by creating as many possibilities and probabilities as possible, but then letting go of them, maximizes your achievement of Yara. By being disciplined, as in the ice shear, will lead to the same endpoint ultimately, but it's slower, it's more controlled, more disciplined perhaps, but it's all about forcing a balance. You're actively trying to force a balance, and in many ways the error of that thought pathway is that you believe you understand what is creative and what is destructive, and that you are able to maintain a balance. It's not like you can bring up your smart meter, for example, and look, oh yes, creation's up here at the moment and destruction's up here, so I need to add a bit more destruction. There's nothing guiding you on how much you've created, how much you've destroyed. There's no guide. You have to be very self-aware to know where your balance is. But as the Vanirian way of life, what you do is you create balance through creating and creating and creating. Now that may seem a bit of a paradox. How can you create a balance by excessively going into one aspect of creation or destruction? Well, the reason for it is, and it only works for creation, if you go down the route of destruction, you just get destruction, and that's it. You're going to have a massive amount of destruction until there is no creation anymore, and at that point you've got Ragnarok. Okay, but if you create and create and create, there's a quality of anything that is created that brings in a natural amount of destruction that is equal to the amount of creation that started or that you created at the beginning. At the beginning, when you create something, it has this creative energy, this ordered energy that you've put into something to create it. You put it in a very ordered manner. So whenever you create anything, whether, as I say, that would be a passing moment of time, whether it's being involved in the preservation to some degree of a life until it reaches its maximum. As I say, you're only acting like Kanas. You're not preserving things beyond where they should be. Once they are reached their end point, they reach their end point. You just have to accept it and move on. Much in the way that I described the amnesia, you have to forget things and just move on and forget about it. No matter how good a memory or how attached you become to it, if it's a physical object or person even, you have to let go. Okay, and being able to do that sometimes I think it's the most selfless thing you can do. Not selfish, but selfless. Okay, because it requires self-sacrifice in many respects, because there are things that you want to hang on to, but you have to accept you must let go of, because then if you don't let go of it, then you do create this imbalance that the other side of the coin, the other pagan, so to speak, feel that the Vanirian lifestyle brings. But if you are selfless and let go of things, you make a sacrifice, if you wish, of the things you love, but also you are letting go of things that you have not liked in an equal manner. It doesn't matter. The flow of energy is very natural. And the reason for this, as I say, is when you create something and put into it creative energy, the moment it's created is the moment it starts to self-implode. In essence, it doesn't self-implode, but it fades away. Anything that is created must come to an end. This is the law of physics. It's the law of our faith, and so on and so forth. That everything that has once been created must one day come to an end point. It must degrade. It must decay. It must rot. It must turn to dust. Okay, and essentially, what happens then is when you have creative energy, it will naturally start to decay towards that end point. It's only if you are preserving and maintaining the thing, okay, that you can prevent it or push it beyond its natural end point. That's not what you do as a Vanirian. You know, you keep it going until it hits max, but once it's hit its max, you leave it, as I say. And when you leave it, you let it naturally decay. And that process of decay is there, as I say, right from the very moment that this thing not is created, but created and has achieved maximum potential. And this is why I say, as a Vanirian, you must act like Canas. You must swell the process of Reizu. That is the process of action, of fulfillment. You must fulfill to the max. And when you fulfill to the max, then you let go. And when you let go, the entropy within that thing that you've created is equal to the amount of energy within it. Now, if you hadn't achieved it to the max, then the entropy, the destructive aspect, could essentially be kind of greater in some ways, because it can only equal essentially the amount of energy put into it. But if you don't put enough, you're not maximizing the amount of oneness that you get from something. Essentially, you're not achieving a probability if you go half measures. You've got to go all in or not. By only partially achieving something to the maximum of your potential as well as the maximum of its potential, by only half achieving it, you don't achieve anything. You achieve nothing. But that destructive energy of that half achieved something is still there, and that's why that destructive energy is now there, but the creative energy never really equated to anything. It will just disperse. If you put half measures in, it will just disperse and become destructive energy, but never added anything to the creative aspect of the cycle of creation and destruction. So that's why you must, as a Vanirian, commit to everything that you do to the maximum. Not only because it allows you to achieve everything in life to the maximum potential that you can achieve it, not only does that progress you as a person, but it also creates this balance. As you create, and more you create, whatever, cool, you create, but every time you create, as long as you hit the maximum of your potential or its potential, then, and you maintain it till it hits its maximum potential, but only its maximum potential, not beyond it, then what you do is then you have put in an amount of creative energy, but that creative energy creates an equal amount of destructive energy. Remember, if it's only half, really you're not putting any creative energy that lasts into the system. But once you've achieved it, essentially it's logged. Essentially it becomes a contribution to oneness. It becomes a contribution to the fulfillment of probabilities and fates and so on and so forth. And so by achieving something, you create an equal amount of both creative energy but also destructive energy. There is a natural balance in the world anyway. And so this is where the Vanirian perspective comes from. Why destroy or try to actively, not destroy, but why actively try to maintain balance between creation and destruction, when as long as you are achieving things to the max, you're putting no half measures in, as long as you commit 100% and fully. And this is where, even though it seems in many respects almost like a lack of discipline and a complete disregard for the balance of things, by you going out and creating and not even thinking about destruction, you are simply allowing destruction to be a natural process of creation that feeds off creation as it does. And you accept that there's a natural balance. For everything you create, there's an equal amount of destruction. So why worry about the balance to start off with? You don't have to, as long as you're being creative, as long as you're creating to the max, and as long as you're selfless, and you do not maintain or preserve life or a moment beyond its natural lifespan. Once it's reached an end, you let it go, you let it degrade. Although you may lose the memory of something, and you may let go of the emotions that you had to connect to that memory, because of course you can't just forget things. They naturally have to degrade, just like anything else that's created. When a memory is created, it will go over time, but remembering that memory is not going to do any harm. But remembering emotions or thinking, oh, that connection. Once you remember the emotions that are attached to that memory, it makes the memory linger. But as long as you don't add significance to the memory by dismissing any emotions that may have been attached by it, if you do remember it but don't connect to it, it will still decay and continue to decay at a natural rate. But the moment you try to linger over the emotions of the memory, or the consequences of the memory, you go, oh, that was a good memory because it's led to this, this and this, or bad memory because it did this and this. You are maintaining the memory, and that's not good. The memory should be allowed to dissipate at its own natural pace. If it's still with you by the end of your days because you've got a very good memory, then so be it. But it will have decayed. It won't be as good, obviously, in 50, 60 years time as it is today. And it's by doing this that we essentially ultimately are the masters of Laufis. We don't try to hold on. We don't try to have that need over hardship, because we simply accept that hardship is or the loss of something is a natural process. And so, as I say, you have to be disciplined to be able to achieve things to the max, but then you must be selfless to let go of that thing that you achieved to the max and simply progress. Now, you may lose the memory of the thing, but the consequences of achieving it, the skills that you develop, the essentially the connection that you make with Yara and Eras, these are still present. These are never lost. And your connection to the spiritual realm as you progress through life, as you let go of things, because ultimately that's the end stage of the creation destruction process, as you let go of things and pass through Isa into Yara, then eventually your Yara will become, as I say, Eras. It will become a connection to the realms where it becomes self-expansive. At that point then you will gain Perfro, which is Pietro, which is the essentially the complete understanding of fate and the connection, or connecting your understanding to fate, essentially. You then have, again, I'll just check the pronunciations to make sure that I get them right. You then have Elras, okay, which is where you interact with that developed understanding of faith that you have in Perfro, and integrate it within yourself. And then Sorelu is the process, essentially it's a higher process of joy, higher even. Sorelu is even higher than Yara. It's the next stage of joy that you can essentially feel by understanding fate completely. You've become a total you have total connection and understanding of fate. Then by doing so, and this you can really only go by achieving, as I say, creation after creation after creation, but then letting go of it also, and creating a natural balance rather than a forced balance like you get within standard pagan practice. It's not about forcing balance, it's about letting there be a natural balance. And then by doing so, you essentially go into Tiraz, Bacano, Eras and Manas, and eventually into Laguz. Okay, and Laguz is all about flowing with fate, accepting that you are part of fate, that there is no sort of illusion of duality between yourself and everything else. You're all the same. As I say, we're all part of the universe. There is no duality. You, me, this computer, pieces of paper in front of me, whatever, we're all the same thing. We all come from the same thing. We're no different. We are united, we are one. And when you become united with everything around you, you develop, as I say, your own oneness, as well as oneness for the universe. You develop your own oneness to the point where eventually you hit Ophura, which is the ultimate epiphany, or joy. It's the ultimate state of joy that one can reach, which can only be realized by fully understanding from a universal perspective, everything from creation and destruction, the dissolving of boundaries of self and other, and flowing with this integration fully with the universe. And essentially it's the process of moving into oneness by accepting your spiritual inheritance and leaving your spiritual legacy behind you. Okay, so Fjorda is very important. Fjorda is that rune now on my little finger. Okay, well, I believe it is. Hang on, let me just make sure. I'm not as well versed in the actual presentation of the runes, but I believe it's that. Not being a runesmith, it's something. Yes. Oh no, it's a father. There's a Fjorda. Oh no, that is a Fjorda. Sorry. Yes. Okay, so that on my little finger is 100% a Fjorda. I just want to make sure I didn't want to be misquoting to you guys. And so when you reach a Fjorda, this is the ultimate endpoint. Because following this, you then have Dagas, which, as I say, can only be fulfilled once the end of the world comes, essentially, so it's out of your hands. But once you've reached a Fjorda, this is the end stage that you can achieve by yourself. And ultimately, you know, you can only get there by accepting, and I say this can be achieved via the standard pagan way of life, i.e. the sort of way of the Inngard, but you can go via down the route of the Uttengard, of the Vanirian way of life also. And the Vanirian way of life really does take into scope those that last ayat of spiritual aspects, as well as the bridge of spiritual sort of transformation also within the second ayat. It takes them into consideration a lot more, because you are accepting of the processes of the universe. You're trusting in the universe to create the balance for you by creating and letting the universe create that balance of destruction through natural processes of entropy. Now, there are hazards with the Vanirian way of life just as much as there are hazards with the Aesir way of life. Humans aren't perfect. The gods themselves aren't perfect. And so, you know, we're heir to making errors. We're prone to making errors. Okay? And so it is possible that as you go through life that you don't achieve, or you don't have that discipline, that willpower, that determination to achieve everything you do to the max. You drop things. You say, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to achieve that. I want to progress onto other things. But as a result, you don't achieve its maximum potential. And so as during the Vanirian way of life, you must have the discipline to continue and keep going on, plodding on, no matter what hardship is placed upon you, until whatever you're trying to achieve is achieved to the max. But then you must also then be selfless and let go of all that thing that you've put potentially all that effort into. You must let go when the time is right. And knowing when the time is right, that's the difficult thing. But this is something that, you know, you need to try to learn for yourself through expanding your mind through Yara, moving into Awas, and ultimately, you know, Sorelu and Fjorda. Okay, but it's a process that you must actively try to go into. And as I say, either way of life is fine. They're both valid, viable ways of life. But this is the discussion of the hardships of going through one, and the limitations potentially going through one, and the potential downfalls of going through the other. Because if you get something wrong, that's when an imbalance can occur. Okay, and it is about living in balance, but there is living in balance in two different ways: a forced balance where you create it through order, essentially, and control and discipline, and the other one where you create it through commitment, but also selflessness or sacrifice, essentially. So the Vanirian way of life requires, as I say, commitment and sacrifice of that commitment that you previously made, whereas the other one, the Inngard or the Aesir way of life, it requires incredible discipline, incredible sort of omnipotence in some ways. It's the wrong word to use, but it requires the wisdom of Odin. And it's quite fitting that it's Odin's way of life, because you need to be a very wise person to live this way of life fully, because you need to understand the consequences of every action you take, and must take that balance upon yourself rather than trusting in the universe ultimately to balance it for you by, you know, by natural processes. It's just a thought. I hope you enjoyed the talk, guys. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope it's perhaps questioned or allowed you to open your mind in some ways to whichever way of life you believe is correct. I'm not saying one is more correct than the other, because it's not. They're both viable. But I would also defend my principles of belief that they are both viable. That the Vanirian way of life, even though many pagans believe it to be incorrect, I believe it to be correct. I believe it to be viable. Okay, and it's the way that I believe that I personally should live my way of life. Maybe that's because I'm destined for Vanir rather than Valhalla, but you know, that's another discussion for another time. But thank you very much, guys, for watching. I appreciate any discussion you have with me in the comments section, yeah, God's blessings on you and viewers. See you now. Bye bye.